all, this is Teacher Janelle, and I'm holding a book. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's about the Norse mythology, Viking mythology. We're gonna be talking about the creation of the world. Yeah, and I base it from this book because this is from Michael Cox, the author of the book. Creatively made a top 10 list of how he narrates the events of the Norse mythology. So this actually caught my attention. He is some sort of a hilarious narrator. We're going to talk about how the world began according to the Norse mythology. So we have of course, we have all questions of how the world began, and because of that question, we have another question: who did it? And Michael Cox even asked, did he or she even take a break when he created the world? This question actually has a lot of answers. Many tried to explain how the world really was created or how it started. The Christian Bible also talks about how the world was created, stuff like that. And a lot of mythologies around the world also have their versions of how the world was created. And the Vikings are no exceptions to that. They also have their own explanation of how the world began. Though science would also have this very famous Big Bang theory of how the world created, Michael Cox coined the word Big Drip theory for how the world was created according to Norse mythology. So let's find out what this Big Drip theory was according to Michael Cox. So let's find out how the world began according to Norse myth. In the beginning, there was nothing at all but huge empty space, which was absolutely bursting at the seams with vast, incredibly empty, and excruciatingly boring amounts of nothing. All this nothingness was called GINNUNGAGAP. On the northern side of the GINNUNGAGAP, there was a land of ice and snow and mists called Nephilim. And on the southern side was a land of flames and sparks called Mospil. Eventually, with much bad-tempered hissing, spluttering, and steaming, the ice and fire from the two lands began to mix. As the flames roared and the melting ice poured into GINNUNGAGAP, a giant man rose up out of the steam. He was enormous. His underpants alone would probably have been big enough to contain the entire population of modern Europe. This big drip of a giant, whose name was YMIR, was said to be the very first living being ever. But sadly, he was also extremely evil. YMIR had numerous and totally disgusting personal problems, one of which was sweating a lot as he slept. One day, and no doubt much to his surprise, some of the smelly grey globules of greasy gunk that dribbled from his oozing armpits turned into a fully grown giant man and woman. Some people sweat buckets, some people sweat cubs. YMIR went one better. He sweated giants. Meanwhile, lower down his body, YMIR's legs, obviously not wishing to be outdone by his armpits, got together and produced a giant of their own. This legendary monster had 6 heads and went by the name of Thraddlmir. Thraddlmir eventually had one-headed son called Bergelmir. Bergelmir was said to be the granddaddy of all frost giants, the huge icy cold beings who were soon to become the all-time enemies of the gods. Things were beginning to happen all over the place now. Some of the melted ice from GINNUNGAGAP turned into an enormous cow called Udumla. And 4 rivers of milk began to flow from her udder. Ignoring the fact that it was probably full of millions of harmful bacteria and unhealthy calories, greedy YMIR drank gallons and gallons of it. While YMIR was getting into some serious dairy product abuse, Umdula kept herself alive by licking at a salty block of ice. 3 days of non-stop licking, a living man popped out. A living man popped out of the ice block. It was called Buri, and he became the forefather of all the gods. time passed and Buri had a son called Bor. The two of them began to fight a war with the evil frost giants, which went on for ages and ages and ages, so long that many of the giants became completely bored to death. The frost giants kept on producing lots of not so little frost giant children of their own who joined in the war as soon as they were big enough, which didn't take long at all. Despite the fact that he was fighting a savage war with the frost giants, and possibly in a moment of rather embarrassing absent-mindedness, Paul married a frost giantess called Bestla, and they had 3 sons called Odin, Vili, and Ve. The 3 brothers absolutely hated all the frost giants, especially enormous, sweaty, evil Ymir. So one day, they murdered the big pudding. Great torrents of blood poured from his body and drowned all the frost giants, ha! Apart from Bogomir and his wife. The brothers were also saved because they'd had the sense to build a boat from a tree trunk and were able to float around in the blood for a bit while they decided what to do next. The brothers, who were obviously keen environmentalists, were anxious not to waste one single bit of Big Ymir's body, so they decided to recycle it. This is what they did with him. They raised Ymir's skull into the air and made a sky from it, but had to employ 4 dwarves to hold up a corner, each to prevent it from crashing down. They threw his brains up in the air and they immediately became the clouds. Don't say you hadn't noticed. They used his unbroken bones to create the mountains. They threw his body into GINNUNGAGAP, where his flesh became the earth that we all live on today. They made his teeth and jaws and his broken bones into rocks and boulders. They used his blood to make the rivers and lakes and a huge ocean which completely surrounded the land. Give or take a few finishing touches, the world of the humans was now more or less finished. All it needed was some people to put in it. This didn't take Odin, Vili, and Ve long at all to sort out. Well, they were gods. One day, when they were out jogging along the seashore, they came across a couple of fallen trees. One was an ash and the other was an elm. They all said thoughtfully, these trees would make really neat human beings, wouldn't they? And quick as flash, they turned the trees into the first proper human beings in the whole world. They made the ash tree into a man called Ask, and the elm tree into a woman called Embla. Every single person in the whole world, and this includes you, reader, is descended from these 2 people. So now you know the truth, and it couldn't be simpler. Your family tree actually began as a couple of trees. So that's the hilarious narration of Michael Cox about how the world began according to Norse mythology. Well, scientifically debatable. Many scientists would not agree with, I think, many instances told in the story as how the world began, but definitely it was very imaginative and very much entertaining. So entertainment value is there. It was imaginative. All right, so I hope the humor in it added to your understanding of how Norse mythology explained how the world began. This is Teacher Janelle once more, and I say ta-ta for now. Bye-bye.